People sometimes make mistakes.
Yes, they do. Shall we play a game?
Hello, divers, and welcome to Mysteries of the Deep. I'm Tom Feeney, podcaster and purveyor of pop culture propaganda, searching beneath the surface of what seems to be the ordinary, the mundane, the pedestrian. This week, we dive into one of the most iconic war movies of the 1980s that didn't have any actual war in it. Well, except the Cold War, maybe, between the movie's producers and its original director. But it was also one of the first films to show kids and their parents what could be done if you had a computer in your home. Of course, I am speaking of the classic 1983 film, WARGAMES.
America's front line of defense is this computer. It is totally secure. Or is it?
You're really into computers, huh?
Yeah,
What are you doing?
dialing into the school's computer.
Are those your grades?
Yep. I don't think that I deserved it. Do you?
You can't do that.
Already done.
You can go to jail for that.
Only if you're over 18. This computer company is coming out with these amazing new games in a couple of months. You might want to play those games. Wow.
What?
We got something.
Games refers to models, simulations, and games which have tactical
That must be
and
them.
strategic application.
Greetings. Game time is near. Shall we play a game?
Love to. Let's play. Global thermonuclear war.
Fine.
All right.
We have a launch detection. We have a Soviet launch. What the hell?
Missile warning, no malfunction.
Oh my God.
I repeat, confidence is high.
Mr. President, this is Barrington NORAD.
Is this a game or is it real?
What's the difference?
War Games. Begin playing June 3rd at a theater near you.
The film was directed by John Badham, who was also responsible for such diverse movies as Saturday Night Fever, Blue Thunder, and the 1979 version of Dracula. Badham had an impressive number of credits under his belt and was nothing if not a really solid directing choice. But he was not the first choice. Why? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. War Games was a very successful film, ranking as the fifth highest grossing movie of 1983. It was well received both critically and by audiences at the time. It starred Matthew Broderick as David Lightman, a bright but underachieving high school student who has a knack for computers and video games. His parents, desperate to find something to shake David out of his teenage doldrums, finances his burgeoning love of computers by acquiring an IMSI 8080 computer and a modem. Now, in hindsight, the parents probably should have bought David a little something less dangerous, like a set of lawn darts. Now, if you don't know what those are, Google it. With his new setup, David figures out how to do a little hacking in his spare time. To impress his would-be girlfriend Jennifer, played by Ali Sheedy, he breaks into their school's computer system and changes her grades. Then, while trying to get into the system of a popular video game company, David discovers something unusual.
Games refers to models, simulations, and games which have tactical
That must be them.
and strategic applications. What does that mean?
I don't know, but that's got to be them. Turn on the printer, will you? I want to get a print out of this. List games. Oh my God.
Oh, he finds the usual stuff. Chess, checkers, poker, theater-wide biotoxic and chemical warfare, global thermonuclear war, you know. Now, his curiosity getting the better of him, he searches for a way into that system. He finds a lot more than he bargained for. An artificial intelligence named Joshua that was designed to take the human equation out of the nuclear missile chain and automate the firing of nuclear missiles during a crisis. What could possibly go wrong?
We have a launch detection. We have a Soviet launch detection.
B-Muse, confirmed a massive attack.
Missile warning, no malfunction.
Confidence is high. I repeat, confidence is high.
Cobra 9, is this an exercise?
Negative, this is not an exercise.
General, DBS is tracking 300 inbound Soviet ICBMs.
Tell me this is one of your simulations, Mr. Kittredge. All right. Flush the bombers, get the subs in launch mode. We are at DEFCON 1.
DEFCON 1?
Meanwhile, David is blissfully unaware that his actions are having real-world consequences at NORAD, or North American Aerospace Defense Command. Shortly after he discovers what is really happening from a news broadcast, David is caught by the FBI and taken to NORAD, where he is interrogated by the man responsible for advocating the automated system, John McKittrick, played by the late, great Dabney Coleman. McKittrick believes that David is working for the Soviets and is detained at the NORAD facility. He manages to escape and join a tour group. Easily the most implausible part of the film. A tour group at NORAD? Come on. Well, he reunites with Jennifer and manages to locate the man behind the creation of Joshua, Professor Falcon, and get him to contact NORAD and stop the computer from firing the missiles. Falcon, however, has a differing viewpoint on things.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Once upon a time, there lived a magnificent race of animals. Dominated the world through age after age. They ran, and they swam, and they fought, and they flew. Until suddenly, quite recently, they disappeared. Nature just gave up and started again. We weren't even apes then. We were just these smart little rodents hiding in the rocks. And when we go, nature will start again. With the bees, probably. Nature knows when to give up, David.
I'm not giving up. If Joshua tricks them into launching an attack, it'll be your fault.
My fault? The whole point was to find a way to practice nuclear war without destroying ourselves. To get the computers to learn from mistakes we couldn't afford to make. Except that I never could get Joshua to learn the most important lesson.
What's that?
Futility. That there's a time when you should just give up.
What kind of a lesson is that?
Did you ever play tic-tac-toe?
Yeah, of course.
But you don't anymore.
No.
Why?
Because it's a boring game. It's always a tie.
Exactly. There's no way to win. The game itself is pointless. But back at the war room, they believe you can win a nuclear war. That there can be acceptable losses.
Ultimately, David and Jennifer appeal to Falcon's love for his deceased son, for whom the AI Joshua was named. They return to NORAD, where they try to find a way to convince Joshua to stop the firing sequence. All in all, it's a terrific film. It has humor, warmth, and a truly chilling and very intense premise. It felt like you were watching something that could possibly happen. And in fact, there was someone watching who felt exactly the same way. Then President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
In 1983, June the 4th, Saturday, President Ronald Reagan is up in Camp David, and like most nights when he's up at Camp David, he watches a movie. The movie that night is War Games, starring Matthew Broderick playing a tech whiz teenager who unwittingly breaks into the computer of the North American Air Defense Command and, thinking that he's just playing a new online game, almost triggers World War III. So Reagan, the following Wednesday, he's back in the White House. There's a big meeting with all of his national security advisors on another subject completely. And he says, he puts down his index cards and says, has anybody seen this movie, War Games? Nobody'd seen it. It just came out. He goes into this enormous plot description. People are looking around, wondering where this is going. Then he turns to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Vesey, and says, General, could something like this really happen? Could someone just break into our most secure computers? And the general says, I'll look into that, Mr. President. He comes back a week later and says, Mr. President, the problem is much worse than you think. This leads to the government's first presidential directive on computer security. So this presidential directive that Reagan signs, it's quite a prescient document. It says that these computer systems, which were then just starting to be developed, are vulnerable to attack by foreign intelligence agencies, terrorists, criminals, and that protective measures need to be taken urgently.
That's right. War Games actually spurred the modern cybersecurity era, ultimately leading to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986. I mean, that's kind of crazy if you think about it. I mean, what if Jurassic Park inspired a government dinosaur cloning ban? Now, as you can see, the influence of War Games went far beyond just the film itself. But it was almost a very different film. The movie began as an idea called The Genius, about a smart but rebellious kid who finds a mentor that is just as brilliant. But the mentor is searching for a worthy successor because he's dying. It wasn't until later when writers Lawrence Lasker and Walter Parks added the computer and military themes as part of the story. In 1980, the screenplay was optioned by United Artists, the film studio behind such films as Raging Bull, Clash of the Titans, and the Rocky franchise. Now, of course, 1980 was also the same year that UA released one of the biggest box office failures of all time, Heaven's Gate. But that's another show. The studio hired director Martin Brest to helm War Games. Now, the first thing he did was to get rid of the dying scientist needs a protege angle. The dying part, at least. Now, for the pivotal role of Professor Falcon, the writers reached out to a somewhat unusual candidate, former Beatle John Lennon. And apparently he was quite interested in taking the part. But tragically, in December of 1980, Lennon was murdered at the hands of assailant Mark David Chapman. As it turned out, director Brest wouldn't have that much more input into the film. He was fired 3 weeks into production. Why? Well, according to United Artists, it was because the tone of the film was too dark and needed to be lightened up. Now, according to Brest, he clashed with an executive producer on the film over how the film should be shot. Now, don't feel too bad for Martin Brest, though. His next crack at directing came a year later. The film? Beverly Hills Cop. After that, his career would be a roller coaster of ups and downs. Ups being Scent of a Woman and Midnight Run. Downs being Meet Joe Black with Brad Pitt. And last but certainly least, Gigli with J-Lo and Batfleck. With John Badham now in the director's chair, things lightened up considerably. The more upbeat tone helped a great deal, especially with leads Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy, who needed to shake off the more sinister tone Martin Brest had introduced. War Games opened in the United States on June 3, 1983, ultimately grossing nearly $125 million on a relatively small $12 million budget. It would make movie stars out of both Broderick and Sheedy, setting the stage for both talented actors' lengthy careers that continue to this day. The impact, no pun intended, of War Games, both culturally and, yes, politically, is pretty remarkable considering it was a mid-budget film with no real stars. And it may have made parents think twice before buying their kids that Commodore 64 or TRS-80 home computer. It for sure made an American president think twice about the security of our nation's nuclear defense systems. Thanks for listening. If this is the first time you've heard this podcast, check out our past episodes available on almost all podcast providers and subscribe so you don't miss a single one. And if you like what you hear, write a review. We would love to know what you think. Or you can drop us a line at thedeepdivepodcast@gmail.com or on our Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or, X, whatever, feeds. You can find links to those and our awesome t-shirt store in the bio of our Instagram page. All clips used in this podcast are meant for educational purposes only and not to infringe on any existing copyrights. Mysteries of the Deep is part of the Deep Dive Podcast family and a production of Automaton Studios.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play. How about a nice game of chess?